So we have with us again this morning Bruce and Cinda McKilleps. And Bruce and Cinda, well, are you technically speaking retired missionaries? Because you had a piece about that, but you're still missionaries, called to be missionaries, but have that official status. And he may say more about that. But they have served in this way, in this capacity, in various channels over the years. They served in Ecuador for 13 years, and Bruce shared that he did a lot of work with Work and Witness volunteers, doing things like building many churches that he designed, and after that time they were in Portugal for 8 years, field strategy coordinators for that area. That includes many countries over there, and Cinda actually did quite a bit too, and so I think there's so much that I could just barely scratch the surface of, but it's so awesome to see how both of them just point back to Jesus, just point to the Lord and everything they're doing have done with Jesus Film and other ways, and just hearing that awesome testimony, not so much about how great I am and all this, but just how many ways they have seen the Lord provide over and over and the Lord move. And so that is what they're going to be sharing about today. They're going to remain seated for a second, but can we welcome them again right now? So actually, before he comes up, we're going to go ahead and roll a video that they've prepared.
As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. God calls us to be church in mission. Missions is challenging. Secularization is a real mission challenge. Then Jesus again spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life.
Eurasia region is the region where worlds meet. It starts and it stretches from centralized Northern Europe. It incorporates a conflictual Middle East, post-communist Soviet Union, and then it moves over to multi-use India and South Asia, where thousands and thousands of Nazarenes are following Christ as Christ-like discipleship. This is what it means to be church in mission.
And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here am I, send me. Through Jesus Film Ministry, they are introducing thousands of people to a personal transformative relationship with Jesus Christ. Through church planting, they organize new believers into local worshiping communities where they learn together what it means to love God and love one another. Through compassionate ministries, people are empowered to care for their own families as well as to improve the economic welfare of their villages and communities. Women learn their God-given value through self-help groups in which they save money to start small businesses. The Child Development Centers reach out to thousands of children, providing them an education, nutritional foods, and spiritual teaching from the Bible. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. We are called to push boundaries. Partner with the church in mission in the Eurasia region.
Good morning, church. It's good to be with you today. And we had a wonderful time last night. That was fabulous food, I tell you. And that is one of my spiritual gifts, eating. So we enjoyed that immensely. We are retired missionaries, and we're living in another role today. Cinda continues to work at Global Ministry Center, and I work at a store where I speak Spanish about half the time every day. It's orange, and I wear an orange apron. You might recognize the big sign out front with initials HD. If you need some lumber or something, you can talk to me later. So we have been back in the United States for the last 2 years, but prior to that, as the pastor said, we came to the Eurasia region. After Ecuador, we were back in the United States for 6 years, where I co-pastored with my father. He was a pastor all my life, and he was pastoring a church he planted in Sun City, Arizona. It's a retirement community. And when we came from Ecuador to join the staff there in Sun City, we were not old enough to live in Sun City. You had to be 55, and I was 53. So we had to buy a house outside of Sun City, and we were there with my father for 6 years. And then when he retired, we returned to the mission field in Europe. Now, Eurasia is a combination of Europe and Asia. And so we were initially sent to work with the Jesus Film. And our regional office is in Germany. So they told us initially that we would be living in Germany. And so we began to study German. But before we even arrived, they asked if we would be willing to switch our location and move to Portugal. And so we did, and we were not surprised that in Portugal they don't speak Spanish. But there were some other people who sent us to Portugal thinking that we would be able to get by speaking Spanish. That's not the case. So we had to learn Portuguese, and I was able to speak to the Navarros in Portuguese briefly this morning. That's about the extent of my Portuguese. I used it all up right there. Not really. I have been able to preach in Portuguese, but I'm much more comfortable than Spanish. So we lived in Portugal, but working with the Jesus Film, we don't show the Jesus Film in Europe. We were showing the Jesus Film in India and South Asia. Now, South Asia are the countries of Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and of course India. And so I would travel from Portugal, which is the furthest west you can go in continental Europe. We lived the furthest west you can go, and then I would have to travel to these countries, and they're not direct flights, and basically it would be an all-day travel. I would travel usually from Lisbon to maybe Frankfurt, Germany, and then maybe to Abu Dhabi or Dubai, and then hop on to maybe Kathmandu or some country, some city in India. And in fact, I do encounter Indians quite a bit in my work, and word has spread among the Indian population that comes into my workplace, and so they'll say to me, "Oh, you're the one that's been to India. Where have you been?" And so I'll begin to name. They say, "Well, you know more of India than we do." Because the church is quite expansive in India, and when you have 1 billion people in your population of India, it is just a fraction of the population, but it is exciting to know that the church is well and growing in India and these other countries. So we want to thank you for the opportunity that we have had to be your representatives as missionaries. We didn't go just because we wanted to travel. We didn't go because we wanted to see the world. We did see a lot of the world, and we did travel extensively, but we were there as your representatives. And so we thank you for that opportunity that we were given that you entrusted us with the opportunity. So the next slide will show you that that's Portugal, and we attended the church that had some of the Barros family in it, in Caso Novo, and I actually had a work and witness team that came, and we did some work there on the Caso Novo church, even though it has been established for quite some time. And by the way, now they don't call it work and witness. They changed it to just mission teams. Very original name, mission teams. And their explanation for changing it from work and witness was because people had the idea that it was always construction teams, and that was not the case. That was not our experience. When we were in Ecuador, we would have evangelism teams, or we would have medical teams, and I would translate for the medical teams and so on. Cinda would be our pharmacist because she could speak to the people, and I would translate for the doctors who typically did not speak Spanish. And we had a team. Let me tell you about it. A team of young nurses. They were nursing students. They came from ONU. Anybody know what ONU is? It's that other Nazarene university. It's in Olivet. It's Kankakee, Illinois. But anyway, so it's the other Nazarene university. And so these 8 nursing students came. They were all girls, and their nursing professor, who actually had her doctorate, and so we would address her as doctor. And the girls we'd go into an indigenous community, and we'd go into the church, and the people would gather, and the girls would take temperatures and blood pressure and that sort of thing and give hygiene talks. And then the doctor and I would examine the patients, and invariably, everybody needed parasite medicine, first of all. But invariably, whatever medicine that we would prescribe for them based on their symptoms, they would maybe have someone at home who had the same symptoms, and they would want to take medicine home with them and say, well, we only have enough medicine only for the people that are here. And so we attended this one woman and her 2 little children, and before they left, and because I was with the actual doctor, they would address me as doctor. And so this lady said to me, "Doctor, I have a question about my husband." And I said, "Is he here?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, we can't help you if he's not here." So, "But doctor, it's only a question." And so she was speaking to me in Spanish, and I would translate for the actual doctor. And so when I translated, what the issue was, the doctor, who was very stoic, she just one corner of her mouth twitched. She wanted to smile, but she didn't. And she said to me, "Well, doctor, what do you think we should do?" In jest. And I said, "Well, let me handle it, since I could speak the language." And so I talked to the lady, and her question was, or her issue was, she said, "Doctor, my husband's armpits stink." And so the doctor had said to me, what do you think we should do?" And so I said to the lady, "Well, he needs to bathe and use deodorant." And she said, "Well, he does, but a week later he stinks again." I said, "Well, it's just a chronic problem he has, I guess." So that was kind of where ministry teams came into play, as opposed to work and witness. But believe me, I don't care what kind of a team it is, it's work for the missionaries. And we would be very exhausted after a team would go. But returning back to Portugal, we have a number of churches in Portugal, and I learned Portuguese well enough that I could speak and interact with the people. And the majority of our churches are, I hesitate to say immigrant churches, but we have very few national Portuguese in our churches. They are, many of them are Nazarenes who have come from Brazil, or maybe from the Madeira Islands, or from Mozambique. And so they tend to congregate based on their nationality. And so we have some churches that are mainly Brazilian, and we have some churches that are mainly from Cabo Verde, Cape Verde, and so on. So the churches, we're all Church of the Nazarene, and we're all part of the family, right? I talked about that last night. We're all part of the family, and praise the Lord. So after we'd been there a year, and I'd been working with the Jesus Film over in Asia, in South Asia and India, I by default, I became the field strategy coordinator. Now that's the Western Mediterranean is the name of it, the Western Mediterranean Field. And just to shorten the field strategy coordinator title, I became the FSC. We use a lot of acrostic, a lot of initials in the church. So I became the FSC of the Western Mediterranean Field. So the next slide, we not only had Portugal, and where we lived, but also Spain, which is right next door. Now, the fact I speak Spanish, I was able to travel to Spain, and I could drive to Spain. In 4 hours from Lisbon, I could be in Seville, or in 6 hours, I could be in Madrid, and another 6 hours beyond that, I could be in Barcelona. Now, if you're from Barcelona, you speak like this. They speak Spanish in Spain differently than the way I spoke Spanish in South America. But we were able to communicate and get along just fine because we're all part of the church. And so we saw a lot of Portugal, we saw a lot of Spain. Now, the next country over, oh, by the way, so most of our churches in Spain are also immigrants, mainly from South America. Very few actual Spaniards in our churches in Spain. And so the next country over is France. I don't speak French, but again, the churches in France are mainly immigrants, primarily from Haiti. We have a lot of Haitian churches in France, and others who have come from French-speaking countries in Africa. During the time of in Portugal, we called it the age of the discoverers, when countries like the Dutch and the Spaniards and the Portuguese, they were exploring the world and conquering new lands and laying claim to and forming colonies. The French were also part of that. And so French speakers would come to France and become part of the church. The only real French church that we have is in Montpellier. That's one of the French words I know, Montpellier. It's down on the Mediterranean, and so I never actually had the opportunity to go to the Montpellier church. Mainly I would go to the Paris churches in Paris. And so we were thrilled to when we had the opportunity to go. The district superintendent in France is actually from Chad, the African country of Chad. So we obviously, no one ever confused us as being family. But we were family. Because we would go and his name was Joseph, and his wife's name was Josephine. Made it very easy for us. And Joseph and Josephine would have us over for a meal in their house, and they had two girls that were late teens, early 20s, and we would just sit around the table and just having a family meal. It was great fellowship together with Joseph and Josephine. And they really did not speak English, and we really did not speak French, but that didn't matter. We just had a great fellowship time. And I shared last night about the opportunity we have for working for Alabaster. So if you weren't here, I'll try to repeat quickly. Right after COVID, I was able to go to France, and we were still wearing masks, but I was able to travel out of Portugal, went to France, and Joseph and the missionary, Brian Ketchum, we were eating in a restaurant. And Joseph's phone rang, and he got up and excused himself to go out on the sidewalk to talk. And when he came back in, he was real excited because he had received his phone call from another denomination who had really suffered greatly due to COVID. I don't know if some of the members died or what the occasion was, but their attendance had really dropped off, their giving had dropped off, and they were needing to sell their building. And they wanted to sell it to the Church of Nazarene. But because you had been giving faithfully to Alabaster, I was able to provide Alabaster funds for them as a down payment, and they were able to buy that church building. We had been shopping for church building, we'd been shopping for buildings, but it would have involved having to change the zoning, a lot of red tape involved. And we had checked into some buildings, but we were going to have to change all the door frames to make them a handicap capable and emergency exits and all that. The red tape was just phenomenal. It would take years to get through all the red tape. We got a ready-made church building. We could not have done that without your alabaster money. Thank you. Now, in the Church of Nazarene, we typically, the denomination will typically collect their alabaster offering. All over the world, churches collect alabaster offering in the month of February and September. Those are alabaster months. But when I was also the DS of Spain for 5 years. And when I became the DS of Spain, I discovered that in Spain, they were taking the alabaster offering in December and February. And I said, those are really close together to have two offerings like that. And they said, but in December, people get a double salary. Well, then let's take the offering in December. That makes sense, right? Let's do it in September and February instead of September. So it worked out. But all over the church, all over the denomination, we collect alabaster offerings. And so you are a part of that. And anytime we've been able to purchase a property, build a church, purchase a building, you have had a part in that. And I want to say thank you. So I was appointed not only to be the Jesus Film coordinator, but also to be the alabaster coordinator for the region. And then later I became the field strategy coordinator at the same time. And then also the DS of Spain at the same time. So the next country over then is Italy. Now, the churches in Italy are Italian because Italy did not have colonies. They did not participate in the colonization around the world. So if they're in the churches in Italy are all Italian. And that is not a picture of the Nazarene Church, by the way. That is a picture of Florence. And that's where the district superintendent lived. We're good friends with Daniel and Vanya. And I'll tell you, if I have time in the second hour this morning, I'll tell you a story about Vanya. But we had an exciting time with Daniel and Vanya, the DS. They live and he pastors the Florence Church. And we were able to, the church that we had our membership in Arizona, they were able, right before we left to come back to the U.S., they came and brought a ministry team, a working witness team, to the church in Florence, and we had a great time working together there. So the churches in Italy are Italian, and while I don't speak Italian, Cindy and I, because of our Portuguese and Spanish, when we're in the church service and they have the words up on the screen, we can sing along with we can't communicate on the street, but we know enough we can sing with the music. And so it was great to participate in Italy as well. Now, I don't have a slide for Greece because we really don't have a church in Greece. But as field strategy coordinator, I was responsible for the work in Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, and Greece. Now, we include Greece because we tried to plant a church in Greece. And we really did that by working with refugees coming out of the Middle East. And many of them were traumatized. They had been through war. And I would meet with some of the refugees, and maybe they were from Aleppo, and they would tell about bombs dropping and so on, and their house being destroyed and all that. And I would ask them, what is your goal? I was encountering them in UN refugee camps in Greece. And they said, well, they hope to get to Germany. Everybody wanted to go to Germany because they had a great welfare program in Germany that would provide for them and their family and so on. But interestingly enough, the UN shut the church out. Cindy and I went with the team that we had volunteers there for a couple of years working with the refugee camps. And then the UN said, you can't work in the camps anymore because you're going to start a war right here in the camps. We're like, how's that? Well, because you're Christian and they're not. Okay? They came from the Middle East. They're not Christian. We were not proselytizing. We were just being Jesus. We were representing Jesus. And on one occasion, we went into the camp, and this little girl ran up and grabbed Cinda by the finger and drug her to her tent, and she wanted to introduce Cinda to her mother. And over a wooden fire, the mother fixed tea, and Cinda shared tea and cookies. These people had nothing. But they wanted to establish relationships with us. Relationships are very important. When people would move on from Greece, the next country north would be Macedonia. We don't have work in Macedonia either. But then there were other countries like Bulgaria and Romania and Hungary and so on where we do have Nazarene work. And we would hear stories about Nazarenes and Nazarene missionaries who would stand by the road, and as people would flock by the hundreds, now they don't have Walmart, but they would still buy cases of water. They'd go buy a case of water, and as people would file by, they would hand them a bottle of water, and they'd say, "We're Christian." They didn't have time for the 4 spiritual laws or the Roman road or anything like that. They would just hand them a bottle of water, and they'd say, "We're Christians." And the response would come back, "We know you're the only ones who are helping us." And even within the refugee camps, we were not evangelizing. We were just being Jesus. But people knew who we were. They knew who we represented. And when they would get the word that they were going to be sent to Poland or they were going to be sent to Germany or wherever, they would often ask, "Will there be a church where we're going?" Isn't that exciting? Because we were representing the church of Jesus Christ. And they recognized that the church was the source of help for them to introduce them to Jesus. Well, this is an image of the Eurasia region, and so we were assigned to the Eurasia region. Now, when you think in terms of the size of the Eurasia region, it begins in the Azore Islands, which are part of Portugal, but it's in a different time zone than Portugal. And so there'd be the Azore Islands, and then there would be Portugal, and then when I got to Spain, that was a different hour of time zone. Does anybody know how many time zones there are around the world? How many time zones are there around the world? Say it out loud. 24. 24 hours in the day, there's 24 hours of time zones. So 24 hours from now, it's going to be the same time now, in a day later. So from the Azores to the far end of Russia, that's represented there, that's 14 of the 24 time zones. It's huge. And you saw in the beginning video the number of languages that the church is working in. That doesn't represent all the languages. That's just the number of languages that the church is working in. So the next slide, then, trying to speed this up a little bit. This is the idea of the Jesus film, and that was my initial role that I went to minister. And many of the people in that area were Hindu. Now, Hindus have 1,000 gods, and so we were introducing them to Jesus. Now, Christianity was not real popular among them. It kind of had a bad rap because in India, for example, the British had been in control for 100 years. And so when people would hear about Christians, they would identify with being white or being British or maybe even being Western. And so Christianity was not for them. Christianity was for Westerners. And so to introduce them to the concept of Jesus, it was a foreign concept. So they would watch the Jesus film, and they would accept Jesus at the conclusion because Jesus didn't say, "Go make converts." Jesus said, "Go make disciples." And so when they would accept Jesus after watching the film, we would introduce them into a discipleship program and help them understand who Jesus is in relationship to their life. And Cinda's role in this was every month, at the time we had about 200 teams that were showing the film in these 5 countries. And every month she would receive 200 reports from each of those teams. They would have to send a report. And they have to have 5 elements. How many times did they show the film? How many people came and watched the film? How many of those people accepted Christ? How many of those people were in discipleship as a result of accepting Christ? And including a testimony. Now, it had to be in English because in many cases their first language was not English. And we did not show the film in English. If their first language was Hindi, we would show the film in Hindi. And so out of the reports that Cinda received, we received some really exciting testimonies that came from that. Stories of healings. Stories of demon deliverance. It was really exciting to receive those testimonies every month. And one woman shared a testimony. She said, I grew up Hindu, and all my life, all my family, we'd all been Hindus. I didn't know any different. But then I was introduced to Jesus, and now I know that He's the one true God. Not 1001, the one true God. Well, I'm about ready to start preaching here soon. In Colossians, Paul was writing, and I mentioned last night in all my travels, I never got an opportunity to meet Paul. But in India, I did have an opportunity to visit the church that Thomas founded. You know Doubting Thomas? He got over that. Now, we think of Paul as the first missionary. I think it was probably Thomas. To take the gospel all the way to India. Now, I know, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but I know at a certain level, how primitive India is today. I cannot imagine what India must have been like 2,000 years ago. And Thomas took the gospel to India. In fact, it's in the southern tip of India, and the people there, now it's not the Church of the Nazarene, but the people there, the Christians there are called Nazarenes. Because he took the gospel of the Nazarene. But Paul wrote the book of Colossians for us, and it was not divided into chapters and verses or headings at that time. So I'm going to start reading in chapter 1, verse 14. And there are a lot of pronouns here. So I'm going to use in verse 13, he's talking about God. So I'm just going to say God in place of He. For God has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son He loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sin. Okay, so now Paul is going to talk about Jesus, all right, the Son. And so in the next verse of 15, he's saying Jesus, he continued with He, but he's talking about Jesus. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by Him, or by Jesus, in other words, for by Jesus all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by Him and for Him. He, that is Jesus, Jesus is before all things, and in Him all things hold together, and He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything He might have the supremacy. That's what that lady was talking about. Now I know that He's the one true God. He has a supremacy. And it's exciting. Now, I know that when people see the Jesus film, they're seeing an actor on a screen, but they're seeing Jesus performing miracles. And we would often hear testimonies of people, they were amazed at the love that Jesus showed to people. Whether their need was for a miracle or whether Jesus was being mistreated, he did not respond in kind. He responded in love. And that came through to them. Now, like I said, I never met Paul, but he needs some help. I'm going to help him out in our understanding of what he wrote, okay? When Paul wrote that Jesus is the image of the invisible God, what he meant to say was Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God. Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God. And so when people would see the visible image of the invisible God on a screen, he became embodied for them. And they placed their faith not in an image, but they placed their faith in Jesus, this Son of God, this God. He was a real, true God for them. And there's much more that I don't have time to share, but Paul just really nailed it right here when he said Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God. Now, whether it's on the screen in the Jesus film, or whether it's you. Now, I don't want to be sacrilegious here when I say this, but have you ever stopped to consider that you are also the visible image of the invisible God? If the Holy Spirit dwells in you, you may be the only image, visible image of God that people see. It's a great responsibility that we have to be the visible image of the invisible God. I work with many people who don't have a relationship with the invisible God. And so we wanted people who see the Jesus film to come to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. We want them to understand that Christianity is not a religion. It's not a religion like Islam. It's not a religion like Hinduism. Christianity is about a relationship with Jesus Christ. A personal relationship. And those who don't claim to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ are not to be considered Christian. Because that is what Christianity is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Well, on the next slide, and soon I'll get into my next hour. So working witness in the Eurasia region, although it's not called that anymore, it's called mission teams. So let's skip that slide and go to the next one. I want to talk about this very briefly. That little yellow thing is an alabaster box. On our table, a display table, we have an acrylic alabaster box that we received at the Germany district mission convention. We thought it was very unique. And so the alabaster boxes take all different forms. Let me tell you about during COVID. There's a little picture there, right, kind of in the middle, and we happen to be, and that is Vanya, Daniel's wife, and that's in Florence. The region, the Eurasia region, had publicized that they were going to have an alabaster box decorating contest across the region, and we were there that Sunday. Because we were also going to be having district assembly on Sunday afternoon, the general superintendent was going to fly in during this church service. His plane arrived. The pastor's son had to go pick him up at the airport, and we were going to have district assembly with an ordination service later in the evening. And so Vanya was going to be presenting. The winner for the region was actually a little boy named Samuel. Samuel was actually Hispanic, but he lived in Italy. So he spoke Spanish at home. He spoke Spanish, but he also spoke Italian. And so Vanya was working with him. His parents did not attend church. His mother would drop him off at church sometimes. And he was 8 years old, and he had trouble in school because he had he had difficulty sitting still. And we had a grandson like that. We have a grandson like that. So the mother was concerned that maybe Samuel was disruptive when she would drop him off, and Vanya said, no, he loves hearing the stories of Jesus. He sits quietly and listens. He's like a sponge. He soaks everything in, Samuel. And it just so happened that Samuel had won the alabaster box decorating for the region. And so she was presenting him his prize that Sunday, and we happened to be there. And so she gave him a backpack and began to pull things out of the backpack. Like a T-shirt from a camp that was left, a T-shirt left over from a camp somewhere on the region. And an EvangeCube that came from the Jesus film. And a Frisbee from a camp somewhere on the region. Various things like that. And so following the service, and by the way, the father, you don't see him there, but the father was off to one side videotaping. Now the father who never attended church, but he was there videotaping. The parents were so proud that Samuel was receiving this prize, they came to church, and Daniel preached that morning. And so after the service, I went up to congratulate Samuel, and he had in his hand, he had the EvangeCube, and it was still in the box, brand new EvangeCube. And so I asked him in Spanish, because I don't speak Italian, and I asked him in Spanish if he would like to see how that worked. And he said, sí. That means yes. And so I opened the box and I went through the gospel presentation using the EvangeCube. And just like Vanya had said, he was like a sponge. He was just very attentive. He sat and listened to me. Later, Vanya told me that the father was videotaping over my shoulder. As I shared the gospel with the simple tool of the EvangeCube. Now, that family is so proud of Samuel. I'm sure that many times they have watched that videotape. I was only given that privilege because I was a field strategy coordinator and because I was the regional coordinator for Alabaster and because I was the regional coordinator for the Jesus film. And I was able to share the gospel with the EvangeCube for Samuel and his family. So that Jesus could become the visible image of the invisible God. There are opportunities like that arise that are God ordained. We could not have planned that, but God knew. And so we have been privileged, you can move on to the next slide. We've been privileged to serve, and we thank you because we are really in this together, right? Amen? Amen. Pastor's going to come now, I believe, and talk to you about faith promise. And may God bless you richly.
Hey, thank you, Bruce. Let's hear it for Bruce. Who do you represent? Do I represent myself? A path that ultimately leads to nothing and nowhere, especially in my case. Or do we represent the Lord? And we know that is what He has called us to. And Bruce mentioned there a little bit, just the simple act of handing out water in that context. I just think so much. There's so much that we can do to represent the Lord right where we are as well. And faith promise is one of those ways. So you should have received a faith promise pledge card. And if you didn't get one, we'll make one available to you. We call it faith promise because it's a promise given in faith that we're going to pledge a certain amount to missions. And I do think if folks want to start coming forward for that, we can start doing that. And I think we have Dan and Roger. And we're also going to need a couple ushers. But the purpose behind this is that we understand all blessings come from God. They belong to God. Our gifts are designed to be given back to God, And so that's the promise and the faith aspect. That comes from God too. All of it's grace. We're grace-enabled, our faith. So pardon me. You may be thinking that it's so great to represent Jesus and hear about all these things they're doing around the world, and you might be thinking, but I just can't do that. I just am not. Maybe I'm not in the shape to be able to do that. I don't have the finances to be able to do that, and all this and that. So one of the great things that we do, and he talked a lot about the difference that missions giving makes, is we can do this pledge. And what this is, it's a little card, and it's asking you to pledge an amount. You don't have to give the amount right now, but to pledge an amount for what you would want to give towards the mission of Jesus Christ, the Nazarene, around the world. Not the Church of the Nazarene, but the mission of Jesus, the Nazarene, through his church we call Nazarene. So it's a pledge, it's a promise. Maybe it's $10 a week. Maybe it's $100 a month. Maybe it's any amount. But you can go ahead and write that down. And when you have written that down, I'm going to invite you to hold it up. And I'm going to need a couple different ushers. I think Cecil will be one, and some of the kids will be one. Good job, Jackie. And kiddos, thank you so much. And they'll come around and just grab a couple at a time and bring it over here to Dan and Roger to count. So I'll invite our praise team up, and we're just going to play one song as this is going around. And you should see an amount that's going up as well while we're doing this. And so we'll just go through the one song. And if you want to clap or celebrate when you see the amount going up, feel free to do so. By the way, you can also give online at southwoodchurch.org. But what we want you to do right now, don't do that part right now, but pledge the amount, and then you can give there later. And there's a place to mark it as Faith Promise. So let's go ahead and continue in worship at this time.